Was Mordecai not rewarded for his deed? King Ahasuerus asked, surprised. This should not have happened. This man saved my life. The servant answered the king, No, your majesty, Mordecai received no reward. Then the king asked, Who's in the courtyard now? Haman is in the courtyard, a servant quickly responded. Very well. Ask Haman to come and see me urgently, King Ahasuerus ordered. Welcome back to our thrilling journey through Esther's life. After King Ahasuerus approved Haman's plan to annihilate the Jews, the law was passed, and it seemed that there was no turning back. All the Jews, including Mordecai and Queen Esther, were terrified. After all the Jews in Susa, along with Esther and her maids, fasted and prayed for 3 days, Queen Esther was about to enter the inner courtyard of the palace where the king stood, trying to save her people. Queen Esther opened the door and entered the courtyard, breathlessly awaiting the king's reaction. But the Lord was with Esther again, and from his throne, King Ahasuerus held out his scepter towards Esther as a sign of hospitality and goodwill. Esther felt great relief and joy, seeing that the king had decided to welcome her in. As Queen Esther approached the king and shyly reached towards his scepter, she chose her words very carefully. Queen Esther, what is your request? King Ahasuerus asked Esther. Even if you ask me for half the kingdom, I will give it to you, he continued. When Esther saw the king's kindness, she felt a bit more encouraged and said, If it pleases the king, Queen Esther replied, let the king, together with Haman, come to the banquet I have prepared for him. It definitely must be more than that, the king thought to himself. Esther had just risked her life, personally coming before him uninvited, only to invite him to a banquet? King Ahasuerus immediately ordered that Haman be brought so that they may go to the banquet prepared by Queen Esther. The king was curious to find out what Esther really wanted from him. Once at the banquet, they all sat down to eat. As he sipped wine from a golden cup, the king asked Esther, Queen Esther, what is your request? It will be fulfilled. What is your wish? The king insisted. Even if you ask me to give you half the kingdom, I will give it to you, the king continued. Queen Esther answered, Your Majesty, this is my wish. If the king pleases and wishes to fulfill my wish, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to a banquet that I will prepare for them. Queen Esther continued, Then I will answer the king's question. Haman left the banquet very happy and cheerful. He had been the only guest of the queen at this banquet. It was just him and King Ahasuerus himself. What an honor! Haman was already a proud man, but now he felt even more important. However, his joy did not last long when he saw that Mordecai was standing at the king's gate. Mordecai was not going to bow before him even now. Haman's face suddenly turned red with rage. But he tried to control himself and hide his anger, especially since he wholeheartedly believed that he would be coming out on top. In the next few days, the entire Jewish people, along with Mordecai, were to be destroyed forever. So why let Mordecai, this Jew, ruin his joy? Haman was in a hurry to go home and tell his wife Zeresh about the honor that had been given to him. When he got home, he called his entire family and friends. After boasting to them about his great wealth and the number of his sons, he said, And that's not all. I've had such good fortune. The king promoted me over everyone else in the palace. Only the king is above me as an authority. Even more, Haman continued to boast, I was the only one whom Queen Esther invited to her banquet along with the king. And wait, Haman announced proudly. There's more coming. The queen also invited me to accompany the king to her banquet tomorrow. It seems that I will finally get the honor I deserve. But suddenly, the look on his face turned grim when he remembered Mordecai. Haman continued, However, all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all of his friends said to him, Why wait until all the Jews are killed? Aren't you the next in command, second only to the king? She continued. Have a pole set up, reaching the height of 75 feet, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself, she advised her husband Haman. Haman was very pleased with his wife's proposal. It was a perfect plan. He could get rid of Mordecai once and for all. Where was God now? If Mordecai was to be killed in the morning, Esther could no longer plead for the life of Mordecai and of her people before the king. Did God forget Mordecai? Will he allow Mordecai to be killed just because he wanted to obey God and refused to bow before Haman? Well, it seems that God had not forgotten him. God had a special plan for Mordecai, and Haman's treacherous plan was not hidden from God either. No one can hide anything from God. The Bible says that he knows all things. That night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. He kept rolling over in his bed, but he couldn't fall asleep. Was this a coincidence? Since the night was long, the king ordered his servant to bring the king's book of Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. At dawn, just as the sun began to rise, the servants read aloud how Mordecai had exposed two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But the Chronicles did not mention that Mordecai had been rewarded in any way. What? Was Mordecai not rewarded for his deed? King Ahasuerus asked, surprised. This should not have happened. This man saved my life. The servant answered the king, No, your majesty. Mordecai received no reward. Then the king asked, Who's in the courtyard now? Haman's in the courtyard, a servant quickly responded. Very well, ask Haman to come and see me urgently, King Ahasuerus ordered. Haman had already come to the court outside the palace early in the morning to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai on the pole he had set up. Haman was brought in to the king's command, and the king asked him, Haman, how should the king honor someone? What do you think a royal reward should look like? Haman, who always thought of himself first, believed that he was the one whom the king wanted to honor. So he said, The man the king wants to honor, Haman began, should wear the royal robes, those worn by the king himself, and he should be given the horse ridden by the king. Then a crown should be placed on his head. Yes, let the king give to the man whom he wants to honor his robes and his horse, and the king's servants should parade him through the city and cry out before him, This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Haman was considering himself the luckiest man on earth. What a dream to be honored in such a way by the king. In a little while, he would get rid of Mordecai, and in the evening he would go to Queen Esther's banquet. What a day! While he was daydreaming, the king interrupted him, saying, Haman, take the royal robes and the horse at once, and do as you've suggested for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. "Be careful and do not neglect anything you have recommended," the king continued. Haman was speechless, but he could only obey the king's command concerning Mordecai. Thus Haman dressed Mordecai with the king's robes and gave him the king's horse and went before him in the capital Susa, crying out, "This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the gate of the palace, while Haman, furious, went home to his wife Zeresh, telling her how his plan had went up in smoke. But he did not have time to finish speaking, because the servants of the palace came to take him to Queen Esther's banquet. King Ahasuerus, accompanied by Haman, arrived at Queen Esther's second banquet. Curious, the king asked Esther again, "Queen Esther, what is your request?" "It will be fulfilled." "What is your wish?" the king insisted. "Even if you ask me for half of the kingdom, I will give it to you," the king continued. Then Queen Esther answered and said, "O king, here is my request." Well, we'll find out about Esther's request in the next episode. But until then, let's take a look at how things have changed. Don't you think that Mordecai and Haman have changed roles? Not long ago, Mordecai was without escape. His death was decided and sealed, and God seemed to have forgotten him. But now King Ahasuerus remembered his deed, rewarded him, and honored him as only a king could do. Haman, the second man in the kingdom, whose demands the king obeyed and fulfilled always. Haman, to whom the king gave his ring bearing his seal, came to be so humbled, and his evil plans were ruined. But wait a second. Do you know what the Jewish people were doing all this time? Yes, indeed, the Jewish people were praying. It had been several days since they decided to fast and pray and cry out to God for help. Maybe sometimes you get the feeling that God has forgotten you. Don't be discouraged. Keep praying to the Lord and keep asking for His help. He will intervene at the right time, often in a way you would never expect. Do not give up. Keep praying and being faithful to the Lord. He will not leave you. If you want to find out what was Queen Esther's request to the king, and if you want to know the fate of the Jewish people, I invite you to join us in the next episode of Esther's life, the last one in this series. Produced by David and Goliath Productions, you can re-watch this episode along with the rest of the series on YouTube on the DG Bible Stories channel. Also, you can find our DG Bible Stories series in audio format on most podcast apps. We also invite you to listen to the DG Bible Songs music. You can find it on YouTube, as well as on Spotify, Apple Music, and other streaming platforms.